To host this Power Up with Ken Thompson. Ken has a remarkable career, and he'll be sharing some insights with us shortly. He graduated from USU with a bachelor's degree in business management and marketing. He graduated cum laude. And Ken's leadership roles have crossed industries, ranging from the Department of Defense to fashion and the apparel industry. Ken has significant leadership experience in the military. He's been a deputy brigade commander and lieutenant colonel, an organization of approximately 1,100 people with over 700 million in assets and 80 million operating budget. There he developed deep expertise in learning and organizational effectiveness. He's now a principal at AlignOrg Solutions, a consulting firm that specializes in strategic design. I'm most excited about how Ken has taken his experience from the military and is using it to help organizations improve their leadership and effectiveness. With that, I'll turn the time over to you, Ken.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Crane. I appreciate that kind introduction. And it's a great opportunity to speak to this Aggie Network today. Hopefully that I can share a few insights on some of the lessons that I've learned over my years in both the military and corporate America to a way that will resonate with all of you. So I'll go ahead and just get started. Just a little bit more about my background. It is a little bit unique, but I grew up in Logan and was always excited since a little kid to become an Aggie and attend school there. So I did. And I did get a business degree as well as a minor in Japanese and military science. Interesting, I decided to join the military my junior year at Utah State. I think I'd been married about 2 weeks at the time and announced that to my new bride. And instead of being scared or fearful or say there's no way, she's like, well, if that's what you feel you should do, then we'll do it together. And she's proven to be an amazing supportive spouse for a pretty extensive military career where I was gone most of the time. So I did graduate also from the ROTC program there at Utah State. I had the opportunity to be the Distinguished Military Graduate, which led to my selection to be assigned to the branch of aviation, which was my goal and my dream all along, because if I'm going to join the military, then I certainly ought to do it with style and fly the Apache helicopter. And so that's what I had the opportunity to do. Eventually, my track in the military, aside from being an Apache pilot, I was assessed to be on the command track, which means I lead organizations that get progressively larger. And it comes with quite a bit of training in between these leadership assignments. So the military sent me back for an MBA, as well as a lot of coursework from Georgetown in organization design. About my military career, I had the opportunity not only to fly my entire career, which is a little bit rare for a commanding officer, but I also had the opportunity to become instructor pilot qualified, eventually led to becoming a standardization instructor pilot and an instrument flight examiner. And I flew a lot, as my wife and family will attest. But I figure that, one, I just had a strong passion for that. And, being a good pilot is essential to be a good leader of that kind of organization. In the process of my career, I did a couple of tours to Iraq and Afghanistan. That kind of comes with the territory. My culminating events, though, is Dr. Crane mentioned, was I had a battalion command as well as a squadron command. If you ask what's the difference, really nothing. It just depends on what kind of organization the battalion or the squadron fit into to give it that. But it's a fairly large tactical unit with usually 24 attack helicopters. And then I culminated my career as a deputy brigade commander for a leadership team there. Once I left active duty, my first assignment in corporate America was to be a COO and a board member of a rapidly growing large supply chain company based out of Salt Lake that had a national footprint and quickly grew to become a strong player in that space. I then did a 1-year assignment with another apparel company to help turn that organization around and took on roles as a president. And after that opportunity was complete, I then joined forces with AlignOrg because I thought it would be a good fit for my skill set and my passion to help other organizations learn from the mistakes that I made and learn from the things that I have learned over the years and share in some of that experience with them. And so now I work with AlignOrg, and our primary clientele are Fortune 500 companies. We help do strategic organization design. So I'd like to share a story. A lot of people ask, well, Ken, why do you do what you do? And how do you get fulfillment in not really just working in one organization, but actually working in many? And so I'd like to share a story. We had the opportunity to do, as an AlignOrg consultant, an organization transformation for a multi-billion-dollar company here in the US. And we work very closely with their executive team on a lot of very significant transformational type decisions, anywhere from their strategy, how they were going to play in the industry and their space. And we made a lot of significant changes on the way ahead. We brought in the subject matter experts, the leadership teams. We did this all collaboratively. We followed a very defined and deliberate process in doing so. But after we had gone through this initial design, the leader called me one day when I was actually sitting on a plane and said, Ken, I really like what we did. The conversations were great. The plan seems good to me, but I'm scared because what we're about to do, the trade-off of doing what we're going to do is significant. And if we get this wrong, our company could be out of business. And so I'm just not sure, are we being too aggressive? I'm just not sure we got it right. And I'm really trepidatious about it. And so as I was listening to this executive, share his concerns that were certainly very valid, it reminded me of an incident that I had many years prior as a pilot. And we were down in a great place in southern Louisiana called Fort Polk. And it's an assessment center. It's a training center. And it's where units go to be validated to see if they're combat ready before a combat deployment. So it's high stress. You're constantly being evaluated and so forth. And our squadron was down there. And I was currently at that time serving as the head of operations, the COO, if you will. And the leader of the organization asked that for this culminating mission, this evaluation mission, that if I would be the air mission commander and lead the flight on the mission instead of being in the operations cell like I normally would. And of course, I accepted the assignment, and we were eventually notified that our mission would be a quick reaction force, a QRF mission. And what that means is from getting alerted, we have to be in the air in 15 minutes and then respond to whatever mission set they give us once we get in the air. And so we put together crews, we did our planning, all our preparations, pre-flighted the aircraft, loaded the aircraft. It was a live fire mission to make things more complicated and so forth. And eventually we got alerted. And so the orders came down, we rushed out to the helicopters, and we each had our duties. My front seater went and checked the weather and brought it back. And after about 5 minutes from being alerted, we met in the front of my aircraft. And we all looked at the weather, we looked at the mission parameters, we did a quick check to make sure everything was set for success. As we looked at the weather report indicated that the current conditions were legal to fly, that there was no cloud ceiling, there was nothing that would prevent us from being able to take off. However, there was an indication in the weather report that said BR minus, and BR it's a French word for broom, and minus means mist. And so what that means is it's not really a cloud ceiling that might have some restrictions on our flying, but it does denote that it's kind of hazy and misty. And of course, as we looked out in our environment, to us, it just felt like it was a kind of a gray, hazy day, but we did not see any kind of cloud ceiling. So we felt it was safe. We got in the helicopters, we launched, and I called for takeoff and got to the departure end, pulled in power and started climbing out. And the second I got to the top of the trees, my whole cockpit, much like this picture you see here, but worse, went completely white, and I could not see anything. And when that happens, if there's any aviators in our audience, this is not a good thing. It's a significant emergency procedure. And in fact, many organizations that study this say that about 80 to 90% of the time when a helicopter or an instrument is going from visual flight rules to instrument flight rules, meaning you've lost reference of the horizon, it results in a catastrophic outcome. And I'd lost friends at the time to this very same environmental condition. Is terrifying. And so you know that your chances of just surviving are quite limited. Nonetheless, we trained for this. And so I immediately called back to my wingman, said, hey, abort your takeoff. I informed ATC that I was declaring an emergency and that I was inadvertent instrument conditions and was going to execute the emergency procedure. As I start talking to my front seater, he's unresponsive. So now I'm doing 2 pilots worth of duties because he's terrified. He's kind of froze up. He was a younger pilot. And I'm also in this terrifying environment. And as much as I'd like to say I executed it perfectly, I did not. My very first instincts I kept fighting was, hey, if I just take out a little bit of power, settle the helicopter, I can probably catch a glimpse of the ground and then just go land safely. And so I took out a little bit of power, settled the aircraft. And as I did, I actually did get a glimpse of my environment, and I saw some treetops out my left and right canopy windows. But unfortunately, they were higher than my helicopter. So I was in some kind of little pocket. For whatever reason, I wasn't hitting the trees, but I was a little bit lower than the actual, tree environment. And as you can imagine, a spinning rotor blade and treetops don't work well together. So this certainly terrified me, and I knew I was in a dire situation. To make matters worse, I caught a glimpse of power lines that were also higher than my helicopter. And at that point, I realized my only chance of survival is to execute the procedure as I was taught. And so what that means is you pull in max rate of climb power, you level the helicopter, you change all your digital instruments to the right instruments to help you fly in these kind of conditions. And so I'm pushing buttons, I'm flying, I'm pulling in power, I'm talking on the radios, I'm doing all of these things. And eventually we were able to establish a good rate of climb power, kept the aircraft level, and turned on radar and made sure I was avoiding other terrain and stuff in front of me. And we began to climb up into the clouds. And it's terrifying knowing that the conditions are even worse that you're flying into, but with the expectation the outcome is going to be something better. And after about 30, 45 seconds, which seemed like an eternity of this terrifying moment, we broke out through the clouds. And all of a sudden now I could see the warm blue sun just, basking our aircraft. And I could see for miles once I got through this layer. And it quickly dawned on me that there was just this misty fog layer that was obscuring the entire training area that really was thick, but it was almost imperceivable to the human eye, and just kind of a crazy weather phenomenon. But here we are on top. We now have, visible reference with the horizon, and we continue to make our appropriate procedures and stuff. And eventually, just one sec. Can't see your screen. Oh, I need to share it. Thank you. Let's see here. Just one sec. I'm going to stop. I know I'm like right in the middle of the story, but. There we go. Is that better?
Looks great.
All right, thank you. So anyway, we're out on top. We can now see the horizon, and we coordinate with ATC, and eventually we're able to land back at the takeoff site. We taxied in, shut down. We were greeted by the entire squadron. A couple hundred people were out there, and you would have thought we were heroes. We certainly were not. But I think they understood the significance of our situation. The fact that we just survived this was quite a miracle. So this was an experience that I had, and I shared this with this executive leader for this company. And I said, you're kind of in the same thing. I said, you're going into this period of limited visibility. Nobody knows what's on the horizon. Nobody really knows what's in front, but we do have indicators. And also on top of that, we have things that will help us, tools and processes to get through that better. So much like I had radar, I had ATC, I had digital maps, I eventually had a front seater to help out with some of these things. As an organization, you also have similar tools to get through periods of limited visibility. We have analysis, we have data, we have analytics, we have subject matter experts, we have a deliberate process. We bring in the right teams at the right people at the right time to work through all of these things. And when you can do this with a deliberate process and forward momentum, the outcome will always be good. And I said, right now, you're just in that fog, you're petrified like I was, but we have to trust in the process. We have to trust that you and your team are following the right things, making the right decisions, making the right trade-off calls, that this will turn out. Well, so we had that discussion. I think we talked him off the ledge a little bit. And to close out the story, it was probably 7-8 months later, he and I, this executive leader of this company, were on stage in New York, sharing this transformation journey to, probably a couple of hundred executive leaders from companies all over the world. And he told his transformation story and the successes. And he said that because of these efforts, he feels that now his company is at least a year ahead of all of his competitors. And at the very end of his speech, he puts his arm around me and says, and I could not have done it without AlignOrg and their team. And that's kind of when I had this defining moment that I realized this is fulfillment. This is awesome. This is a great to be part of this organization transformation and know that we just had a little bit of a role in this outcome. And so that was what really solidified my desire to be in this space and why I decided to do what I do now and plan on doing that until I retire. So how this applies to us, I think all of us to some degree have times of limited visibility or times of frustration in our careers. And it may just be frustration like, I don't know why I'm in this meeting. I don't know why we're doing this initiative. I'm not sure why management made this decision, whatever it is. A lot of times there can just be frustration by feeling that you don't really know where this is going, or even if you do, are you able to influence it in a positive way? Are you empowered to do that? And so that the team will capitalize on your efforts to contribute to the final outcome. And I'd love to say the military has mastered this, but we haven't. I think we've learned some tools and techniques that help define this problem and help address it. But it still comes down to how well it's executed will result in what kind of outcomes happen. I think one of the biggest differences here in the military, if we don't get this right, usually people die. In corporate America, if you don't get it right, profits can be lost, or on a worst case, the company can go out of business. So this can be a significant thing for a lot of organizations to tackle. And I'll share a little bit about a technique that I find is very helpful to address this type of environment in just a moment. But before we do so, I also think it's important to look at how your organization, your team, your military, whatever it is that you're working on, how are you observed from your competition? So as a military, if you were to go back to World War II, there was an interesting, there was two different expressions that were alleged to have been said. And of course, we can't fully validate it, but there's a lot of indication that these events happened to some degree, where leaders of the American military's forces, the competition, if you will, this is what they said about the American military. And if you look at the one there from the Russian general, he said, one of the serious problems in planning against American doctrine is the Americans do not read their manuals, nor do they feel any obligation to follow their doctrine. This is a very compelling statement because one, if you know anything about the military, the American military, this is just not true. We actually study our doctrine very deeply. I feel that we take it as serious as any other military organization in the world, if not more so. And I think we take great pride in knowing what our doctrine is. So if that is the case, then why is it that our competition doesn't think that that's how we act and that's how we behave? Why is it that this is frustrating, if you will, to our competition? Because to me, I look at these statements and go, yeah, I'm glad that is your perspective, because that means we have something different that you all don't have. And so what is that? Well, I'll address that here in just a sec, but I think from an organizational perspective is, how does your organization or how does your team, how are you viewed from other people inside your own company, other teams that are doing similar projects, or possibly your competition? How would they view you if they were to look at you and how you perform as a team? Would they compliment you? Would they say negative things? How agile can your team be? These are some important dynamics that really are contributing factors to an overall success of the organization. And a lot of it comes down to the concept of bringing in the team, empowering them to make decisions. And so how do we do this in the military? And this is the key concept here that I hope to share and get across to our audience today, is there's two things that we do in the military. The first one is part of an operations order. So anytime we do an operation, this could be in garrison, it could be a mission that we do in support of the troops. It's basically any large muscle move in the organization, we put together an operations order. Within that operations order, this is basically in the operation order talks about all the things that have to come together to get to the desired end state. It's a very complex kind of tool, but inside of it, we do this thing called a mission statement. And this is when the leader of the organization or his or her representative will express in a short paragraph the who, what, when, where, and why. And this will be expressed to everybody in the organization. In fact, it's the only thing that by doctrine in the military is required to be stated twice. So you can't just state it once, you actually have to repeat it because we feel it's that important. The very next thing that is addressed after the mission statement is a thing called commander's intent. And by doctrine, this is the one thing that as the commander of an organization, big or small, I am required to brief personally. I cannot delegate this responsibility to my COO or to my head of HR or to anybody else. It is my responsibility to not only brief it to my organization, but I also have to write it. And it's supposed to be very simple, but I need to express in simple words, what does winning look like? What risks are we willing to take? What trade-offs are we willing to take? What are my left and right limits? Now, that's not a tactical limit per se, like on azimuth, but it's a figurative term that means, what are my guardrails? How far can I actually take this? How do we assess this risk and how do we act against it? And normally we do this in a simple method called PME, purpose, method, end state. The purpose is for this. Here are the things that we're going to be doing, the methods of getting to my intent. And then my end state is my final outcome. This is what winning looks like. This is what success looks like. And so this simple piece on the right here, the screen, this is what I brief. And if I can make sure that everybody in my organization knows this and understands this, if they forget everything else, then they should be able to take actions around our SOPs, around our doctrine to get us to that desired end state. And this is the special sauce that many other militaries don't have. They do not empower other leaders inside their organization to take this dramatic of a shift away from doctrine to respond. So it's a pretty cool concept. Here it is actually right out of the operations manual, just for those that might be a little bit technical or kind of geeky out. This is what it says and describes it in a little bit more doctrinal way of what commander's intent, what commander's intent is. And this is how we would apply it or translate it into a corporate setting. So instead of it being an expression of risk and trade-off, soldiers, that kind of stuff, really it's to empower subordinates to act and behave on their own within the parameters the leader states, with the understanding that they know what the final outcome needs to be. Now, here's a key concept that a lot of people I think tend to overlook, in my opinion, is that just simply empowering people, simply giving them, hey, this is what I want you to get to, without the conditions set behind the scenes, can also be disastrous to an organization. If you've ever heard, hey, just get it done at all costs. I don't care what it is, just get me here. If you don't have the processes, the SOPs, the training, the understanding behind it to support it, then you can be in a world of hurt. You just invoked further chaos. So before you just start enacting the principles of commander's intent or whatever it is that you want to call it, you have to make certain that you have the framework to do it. Because it goes back to this adage, no plan survives contact with the enemy. This is not just a military term. This is a strong expression of what corporate America is like, is you can have your strategy, you can set the conditions, you can all these things. But the second your competitor suddenly announces a new capability, chances are your previous action plan is going to need to be changed. The second the first RPG is fired at a formation of attack helicopters and your wingman breaks right, you break left, there's obscurance, there's mountains, you're power limited, there's somebody yelling on the radios, your whole plan just went to crap pretty quickly. And you have to be able to quickly reorganize and still deliver value. So in our case, we still have to deliver close air support to troops on the ground, irregardless of being shot at or irregardless of having some kind of mechanical issue or things like that. President Roosevelt also recognized this key ability here about expressing intent. Now, he doesn't say how it should be done, but he certainly expresses the value in allowing leaders to act on their own. He says, you appoint good people around you and then get the heck out of the way and let them do what they do best. There again, assuming that the right conditions are set behind the scenes. So how do we do it? I'm just going to share with you very quickly six ways that I think organizations can do this and apply this concept and be very successful. The first one here is to communicate, really clear. And this is where you make sure that they understand what the end goal is, how you want them to react. It's give them that guardrail, this guidance that they need to know what your desired outcome is. Now, I'll give you an example that I mentioned earlier, is that what can happen when these proper guardrails are not established, but you still exercise commander's intent. And so I kind of count this as I don't care how you do it, just get it done kind of mantra. Well, when that happens, I can give you an actual real life example when this happened in my organization. It was not a fun event, but this is what happened. And so you can see from that picture there that this was a mid-level leader assigning a simple task to be done without having the guardrails, without having the right briefs, now understanding the terrain, not pairing the right drivers and people and crew in the vehicle to have the experience and judgment to make good decisions. And ultimately, it ended up being a very expensive Army vehicle being destroyed. And I'm put this picture up there. You can take a quick look. For those that are observing, you will notice there are no tire tracks that go into this little stream. And so this vehicle actually went airborne for quite a few feet before it landed and was eventually destroyed. Luckily, it was minor injuries. But as we dissected what went wrong here, there was just not enough guardrails inside the process. It was just get it done at all costs. I don't care. And so it led to some bad judgments and a lot of bad decisions being made along the way. And it did not get to the desired end state. So, really think about, what you're saying besides just the end state. Number two is make sure you have a solid organizational framework. This just comes down to what business processes do you have in place? What SOPs, what systems, what data and analytics are you looking at to help make those decisions and make sure that you're staying on course? A student application is, make sure that if you're given some kind of assignment, whether you're still in school or you're just in your first project, make sure that you know what resources are available to you so you can get that greatest outcome to happen, not just a mediocre outcome. Number three is understand the key risk areas and trade-offs. Many people ask, what do you do as a commander? My answer is pretty simple. I give the same answer every time. I do three things. I mitigate and manage risk, I provide resources, and I provide guidance to my organization. That's it. I wish I had a lot more sexy things to say about what I do, but it's very simple. I focus on those three things. I let all the people around me do all the other stuff. It's just important that I do manage those three critical things. So identifying risk and knowing trade-offs, not saying yes to everything, knowing when to say no. These are some things that I think are immensely important. And to be very direct, many organizations, even in that Fortune 500 realm, still struggle saying no, still struggle having trade-off decisions, and still struggle knowing what risk to attack when. And so as you look at this picture here, I actually stumbled across this just a few weeks ago in Salt Lake when I was doing lunch with a colleague. We walked out and we see a dumpster fire. It's kind of interesting because this term dumpster fire is also a very common expression in corporate America about chaos and mess and, this project's a dumpster fire. You hear that term a lot. So I thought it had a really good play there. But applying to looking at risk, you look at this dumpster fire and think, okay, well, that's risky. It's kind of close to a building. It's on fire, but I think we can contain this. This really is a low threat risk that we have here. But the other question is, are you really seeing the whole picture? Have you asked all the right questions to understand the amount of risk that you really have? And are you mitigating it properly? And from that, I would then show you a different perspective. As I walked around the dumpster, I saw a different variable. A newer car, Ford Focus, I believe, is parked right there next to it. Well, is that significant? Maybe, maybe not, but it certainly changes the dynamics of the situation. And if I just took a quick look and made a hasty decision, that may not be in the best interests of this particular solution. And so I want to look around it and say, okay, can I gather more data to make an even better decision? Keeping in mind that we don't want to stall out the project either. Nobody likes a leader that can't make or that stalls too long to make a decision as well. Number four, problem solving. This is also an interesting thing. There's lots of ways of doing problem solving, but I will tell you that there are processes available. Simply going with your gut or leading by consensus, there may be a time and a place for these things, but I would argue that, think of what process am I using? And your process simply could be not always answering every single question that comes up to you as a leader, because now you become kind of this hierarchical leader. Maybe you in turn around and ask them a question back. Well, what do you think is best in this case? Or what would you do? Or under these constraints, what do you think is best? And really empower your people and help your people start to think critically, because pretty soon they're hopefully going to be in your role. And they'll need to behave and act like you do as you're progressing up through the ladder. So think about these kind of stuff. Be proactive, and also be the kind of person that if you're on a project team, nobody likes a participant that constantly outlines and states all the problems without providing solutions. So be that solution finder. Recognize and reward initiative. This is so important, is if you want to manage a culture which will drive the effectiveness of your organization, well, how do you do it? Well, we believe that culture is really a collection of mutual choices that an organization and organizational leaders make. And one of those choices is how do I want to reward and recognize good behavior, good actions in the organization? And letting that go can be very detrimental. So just a quick example, we were tasked with a very high operational tempo some years ago in a military organization where we had to fly more than what we had the maintainers and the resources to maintain the helicopter. And when I said, hey, I don't have enough resources to maintain this kind of flight operational tempo, my answer was very typical in the Army: sorry, Ken, figure it out. And but they're not going to lower my requirements. So I went back to the organization and said, hey, folks, we have to figure out a way to do a complete phase maintenance in less than 60 days. And this means you tear down an Apache helicopter all the way down to its skin, fix a whole bunch of things, and put it back together. It's typically a 90 to 120 day process. I said, if we want to survive and complete our mission, we have to do it in 60. And so we began this process, and we tried it 3-4 times, and it failed. We couldn't get there. 73 days, 74 days, 71 days. We couldn't get it to 60. And so, finally I said, well, what's really going to motivate these people to really just think a little bit more creatively and to really take action? And so I did something that's a little bit unorthodox in the military. What I did is some of you may know or may not, but aviators, we take a lot of pride in our hair when we still have it. And we're notoriously teased for having out of regulation hair and having long hair and blow dryers, hair gel, all this other typical stuff, because I guess we all think we want to look like Tom Cruise. But for the military environment, aviators traditionally take a lot of pride in their hair. And so I said, I'll tell you what, if we can get this one in 60 days, you can cut our brigade commander's hair. We'll give him a GI haircut. And I didn't ask him, and this is my boss, but I basically just volunteered my boss's hair to our entire organization if they could get it in 60 days. And I eventually, about 2 weeks later, told my boss in passing, oh, by the way, I told my squadron that if we get this in 60 days, they could cut your hair. And he's like, what? I said, yeah, I'm sure you wouldn't mind, because this is more important. And he kind of laughed and didn't think we would do it, but we did. And the very next attempt, we got it in 60 days. And like a good leader, I'll show you this first picture. That's a full colonel right there in the background that just lost his hair. And I thought it was super funny that I just got a great win and my boss lost his hair. But he in turn was not going to let that slip and made me shave my hair too. So that's him shaving my hair. If you were to see the other side of the picture, you would see hundreds of soldiers laughing and taunting and seeing us get a haircut. That's what I looked like afterwards. It's not very good. But not to worry, they gave me a nice little wig there to cover it up. And so I wore that around for the day, but eventually had to grow my hair back. So this is just an interesting way of showing how we can use creativity on how we want to reward behaviors. Lastly, continuous feedback is pretty common sense. We all know that everybody needs to know how they're doing, what they're doing well, and what are the things for improvement. As a leader, you have to learn and develop, if you don't already have it, the skills of radical candor, if you will, from Kim Scott. There's a great book on that, but it is having candid conversations with your leaders. It's done through empathy. If you can't show and generally demonstrate that you care for them, then the feedback that you get is going to be perceived as very, very critical and very negative. But if you show that you care about the organization, about the development of that person, and then provide good, positive feedback, and I say positive, it's just accurate feedback, it can be a tremendous tool. You see the money here in the picture. This was actually a story of an employee that I had in corporate America that, unbeknownst to her at the time, she was our purchasing agent for an apparel company. And she was given a small gift, and we had a corporate policy about, gifts from vendors had to be super small, I think less than $100 or whatever. And so she was given a gift by one of our vendors. And she took in the bag, didn't open it, took it home. And when she took it home, she opened it up. And underneath the less than $100 gift, there's an envelope of $10,000 in $100 bills. And it just simply said, thank you for your business. And, you think about it, put yourself in that shoe. She didn't make a ton of money, family, kids, all this kind of stuff. That $10,000 goes a long ways for her. Nobody would have known about this. I am certain the vendor never would have told me or anybody else that this happened. But that very moment, she took a picture of it. She sent it to me and said, Ken, this is what the vendor just did. I'm mailing this money to you, or I need to deposit in a bank, but I find this kind of action completely unacceptable. And I want you to know right away what happened. And so, she handled it brilliantly. And of course, I had a very candid discussion with our vendor and told the vendor, this is not who we are, and you need to stop that behavior, and actually took business away from that vendor for a period of time to send a message that our corporate values are not like this. Secondly, to reemphasize this and to provide feedback to the rest of the organization that this is who we are, is next time she was out to headquarters, we flew her out, and in front of all of our headquarters team, we gave her a portion of this cash, a fairly significant amount, in front of them, and said, we want to recognize, this person for doing this action and for reporting it and helping us address it and maintaining our company values. Obviously she was elated to get that, super excited, but the recognition was probably more important, and the understanding of this is who we are and who we're not. And that feedback was probably more important than the little bonus that she got from this money. So, that's just another idea, but these are ways of giving feedback tied to recognizing and rewarding good behavior. So that's the point that I wanted to share. I'm sure there's probably some questions, Dr. Crane, that you may want to follow up on, but these are just some of my key thoughts. I do want to do a shout out to Lindsay, is also a former Aggie, a very proud one, and she put a lot of this stuff together for us in the format that you see it today. So she's listening in. Shout out to her for her hard work, and thank you for the opportunity. So if there's time for questions, I'm all yours.
Ken, thank you. Incredible principles on leadership and practical advice on how we can all take it to heart in our unique spheres. We have a few questions. We have a few minutes to work through some questions. We'll see how many we can get through. The first question is, how do you help individuals in the organization buy into a mission or a mission statement?
That is such a brilliant question. I think this is something that we struggle with, not just in the military, but we do this even when we go into corporate America. We're doing organization transformation. This involves thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. Well, how do you get their buy-in? There's a couple of things I would share. One is it starts at the top with the transformation effort. Our company's book, Mastering the Cube, addresses this, but there's some times that leaders have a tendency to make decisions behind closed doors in secret societies. Maybe they do this in a way that does not come across as being collaborative. The first thing I would do, if and when possible, can you bring in key members of your organization, key influencers, key subject matter experts, and involve them in the decision-making process? Walk them through the problem statement, walk them through potential solutions, and then have their expertise help you craft the solution. I would also urge, though, that doesn't mean that this is a consensus company now. It doesn't mean that you lead by consensus, but what it does mean is you lead by collaboration, that you hear their input. When they understand the process and you work on coming to the desired outcome collectively, then that is when their buy-in just naturally happens, and they now become what we call an alignment leader. It's someone that now is bought in and understands the whys, so that when he or she then goes out to the other parts of their organization, they know why this is happening, and they become a tremendous influencer, and their influence is now starting to be felt across other parts of the organization. So I think that's a really good principle to start that part of the process with, is be collaborative, but don't necessarily be consensus building.
I think one of the principles I learned from AlignOrg Solutions is that people own what they co-create. So involving them in that process, soliciting input and feedback, allows them to take ownership early on what that mission is. Second question from a student, and I think this will be our final question, is what do you look for in individuals to enact the commander's intent? So some people, it's a lot easier for them to take orders, it's more comfortable that way. How do you find people who are receptive to this empowerment model that you've described?
Boy, that's another great question. I think that commander's intent. Now, let's start with the assumption that the team, the company, the organization, whatever it is has the right foundations in place. So before you even exercise commander's intent, make sure that there is some sort of framework on how you do things. Otherwise, it's just too much chaos and everybody just starts doing what they think is best without any guardrail. So assuming you have that, commander's intent is designed, starting with the military and real-time application, to be used down to the lowest level. There really is no readiness of okay, can I use it with this person and not this person? I would expect that if you have the SOPs and the processes in place, that if I go to even the lowest level corporal, that's the first level of leadership in the US Army, they have enough experience, although it may be a year, to know that, okay, here's our SOPs, here's how I do this little part of my role in my organization, here's the intent. So when that theoretical first bullet flies, I at least know what I need to do after that. And so I would practice using it in almost every situation that warrants it. I use it with my kids all the time. I try not to be overly dictatorial on what you will and will not do, because then it becomes very black and white. It stifles creativity. It doesn't always cover every situation. And sometimes people feel overly dominated by that. And so if you can express, hey, son, you're about to do this. All I really care about is that this outcome happens and that you do it within these guardrails. But how about you figure out how to happen, how this event should happen? That is how you grow and develop leaders to become, very passionate, strong leaders in the future. So I would not wait to practice that.
So we're going to take one more question here, and the question is, what books do you recommend? So people that are interested in building their leadership skills, what's been impactful for you?
There's two books, hands down. And there again, these may resonate with some and maybe not necessarily with others, because I read books on things that I need to work on. And so there's two books. One is, I mentioned earlier, Radical Candor by Kim Scott is a brilliant book that very simply outlines a 4-segmented process on how to exercise a candid discussion with somebody else or with a team or whatever. And it talks about how you approach it. From what angle you approach it means everything. If you approach it with empathy and directness, then you're going to get the best outcome. But you have to be able to express that in that discussion. And if you avoid directness, if you avoid or you're careless by not showing empathy, then you're going to get suboptimal outcomes. And so it talks about the importance of this with many scenarios, many application techniques and anecdotes and so forth to really resonate with the business leader that wants to hone that in. I would say one more is actually by a local organization, a local writer, Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. If you want a book that really helps you look at yourself differently and it helps you really understand how others may be perceiving you and how you use others in your leadership, it is a very profound book that can kind of be game-changing. It certainly was for me. It helps realize that maybe I'm doing or saying things where I'm not expressing my value and my appreciation for the people. The second any of your subordinates or anybody under your governance, your stewardship, if they feel that they are just a tool as an end to the means, then they're only in it halfway. And so the more that you can be aware that, hey, I need to find win-win situations. I need to help express myself in a way that shows that my motives are pure and I'm doing this for our best reasons. And this is why this needs to happen, and how you're coming across when you do that. It can be very, very powerful. So those would be the top two at this time.
Thanks, Ken. I also want to put a plug in for you and your work. Ken is quite an author. He's prolific and writes his insights on AlignOrg.com. So if you go to their website, you'll find a number of recent publications that Ken has pushed out that will help continue to shape and inform your view of leadership and organizational effectiveness. Ken, we want to thank you today for your time and helping us to power up, think about how we can improve our leadership and improve how we help others and empower around us those who we work with. And we really want to thank you for your time and for being part of our Aggie family. So thank you again.
You got it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening.